Personal computer, desktop, assembly. Things to prepare before assembly. Anti-static wrist strap. Set of screwdrivers and pliers. Piece of cloth. CPU thermal compound recommended. PC components. Installing the motherboard. Make sure you have all the components in place in a nice, clean and big enough place to work with. Put your anti-static wrist strap on to prevent your components from getting affected. Make sure your hands are clean before starting. Unscrew and open the side doors of the cabinet. Lay the cabinet on its side. Put the motherboard in place. Drive in all the required screws on the motherboard screw mounting points. Installing the CPU. CPU is the heart of a computer, so make sure you handle it properly and do not drop it or mishandle it. Do not touch the pins. Get hold of your motherboard and CPU manual. There is a golden mark on the CPU to help you assist. Open processor socket. Find the processor socket, which will be covered with a protective plastic cap. You will see a small arrow on one corner of the plastic socket cover, or on the socket itself. Take note of where this arrow is. You will see a small metal lever next to the processor socket. Press down on the lever and pull it gently to the side away from the socket and open the socket tray. Processor installation. You will see an arrow in one corner of the processor. Line up this arrow with the arrow on the socket and gently place the processor onto the socket. Close processor socket. Once the processor has been gently seated, you can lower the retention lever and push it back down into place. Lowering the lever may require some force. Apply thermal paste onto the center of the CPU's IHS. If you already have thermal paste pre-applied on your cooler, you can skip this step. You only need to apply a small amount, roughly the size of a grain of rice or a pea. Installing the heat sink. After installing the processor, we proceed to installing the heat sink. There are different kinds of heat sinks that are bundled with the processor, and each has a different way of installation. Place the heat sink on the processor. Secure the heat sink with the lever or screws. After this, you will need to connect the cable of the heat sink fan on the motherboard. Again, look into the motherboard manual on where to connect it and then connect it to the right port to get your heat sink in operational mode. Installing the RAM. The newer RAMs, i.e. DDR RAMs, are easy to install as you don't have to worry about placing which side where into the slot. DDR RAM terminals are split into two lengths to fit into the RAM connector. Push down the RAM into the slot. Make sure both the clips hold the RAM properly. Installing the power supply. We will now install the power supply, as the components we install after this will require power cables to be connected to them. Place the PSU into the case bracket. Put the screws in place tightly. Installing the video card. First, you will need to find out whether your video card is AGP or PCIe. AGP graphics cards have become redundant and are being phased out of the market quickly. Remove the back plate on the case corresponding to the graphics card. Push the card into the slot. Secure the card with a screw. Plug in the power connection from PSU if required. High-end graphics cards need dedicated power supply, usually a 4/6 pin plug. Installing the hard disk. Hard disks are fragile and needs to handled carefully. Place the hard drive into the bay. Secure the drive with screws. Connect the power cable from PSU to hard disk. Connect the PATA IDE or SATA cable from motherboard into the drive. Installing optical drive. The installation in optical drive is exactly similar to in hard drive. Place the optical drive into the bay. Drive in the screws. Connect the power cable and data cable. Tip: when installing multiple optical drives, take care of jumper settings. Make sure you make one as primary and other slave by using the jumper. This is not applicable if the drives are SATA drives. Connecting various cables. You will need to consult your motherboard manual for finding the appropriate port for connecting various cables at the right places on the motherboard. Connect the large ATX power connector to the power supply port on your motherboard. Next, get hold of the smaller square power connector which supplies power to the processor and connect it to the appropriate port by taking help from your motherboard manual. Connect the ATX case cables for power reset button in the appropriate port of the motherboard. Connect the front USB audio panel cable in the motherboard. Plug the cable of ATX case cooling fans. Get the rest of the PC components like monitor, keyboard, mouse, speakers, etc., which we will connect now. Connect the VGA cable of the monitor into the VGA port. If mouse keyboard 8 ARD or PS2, then connect them to PS2 ports or else use the USB port. Connect the speaker cable in the audio port. Plug in the power cable from PSU into the UPS. Also plug in the power cable of the monitor. Double check all cables before power on the PC. Installing the OS and drivers. Insert OS CD/DVD into CD/DVD-ROM drive. Set the first boot device to CD/DVD drive in BIOS. Pop in the OS disk. Reboot the PC. Install the OS. Install drivers from motherboard CD applicable only to Windows OS. All done. PC is now ready to use.